Hey, I'm Andy, and welcome to Rock, Roll, and Red Plaid. Oh boy, do we got a good one for you this time. Tonight on Rock, Roll, and Red Plaid, Todd Kerns is with us. From playing with Slash, Toque, and Age of Electric, his musical resume stretches out for miles. You guys are gonna love this episode. Sit back and enjoy. All right, we are here. Rock, Roll, and Red Plaid podcast, episode, I hope I have this right, 30 something at this point. Here with Todd Kerns. Todd, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. I've been going through some of your stuff there, looking through here, there, and everywhere, um, and wanted to just pick your brain about some stuff and all things lovely music stuffs.
Pick away. I have a picture
Perfect.
of Queen behind me, I noticed.
I
This
am
is
a massive Queen fan.
where I'm staying right now is some sort of, I would say, early 80s Queen, it looks like.
So
Mustache
like
Freddy, so I don't know
perfect.
what,
Yeah.
yeah, somewhere
The
around there.
just post the game, maybe Hot
Probably.
Space.
Probably. It might be it's one or the other. Yeah, it's definitely
Yeah,
leading
yeah,
into
of
that. Yeah.
course. Yeah.
Judging by the judging by the yeah, by the fashion, I would say it looks like right around that period for sure.
Fantastic. I love it. I just saw Queen and Adam Lambert at the Garden about a year ago.
Oh, that's a
Oh
great
my
show.
goodness.
So good, yeah.
It was great that they had Freddie in the show too as like a
I
quasi
know.
yeah, yeah.
That's a hair-raising moment, really, honestly. It just blows my mind every time I see it. Yeah.
Because his voice comes in first and then you see him. It's like, wait a second.
I
You
know.
know?
It's so great.
I guess that kind of leads into kind of the first question is who were some of your biggest musical heroes growing up? I guess you could say.
Um, well, that would be they would definitely be one.
Yep.
Early on, it was sort of like I think like anybody, I think I sort of dug through my parents' record collections and probably just a little bit of whatever was on the radio or
Hmm.
like when I was a kid, I was young enough to have been like the tail end of things like like a lot of that American Bandstand and a lot of that kind of
Mm.
stuff. A television show called Solid Gold. So there was a lot of like 80s and late 70s to some degree stuff that was definitely a big deal.
Yeah.
Realistically, the Beatles, obviously, I call them the four major food groups. Well, there's really three: the Beatles, the Stones, Elvis, stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
my father was big into some outlaw country stuff. So Johnny
Ooh, okay.
Cash,
Yep.
Willie Nelson,
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. He was always really interested in like, and guys like Roy Clark who were shred-tastic in that world.
Yeah, totally.
and then I think as a kid, like I said, then we started to find Kiss obviously was a big one for
Yeah.
most of us as kids in those days, and
Hmm.
they were kind of a gateway drug to pretty much everything else.
Yeah.
The Who was a band that I stumbled upon as a kid that was really a big. Well, they put out the film The Kids Are All Right, and
Mm.
I was obsessed with that, and that's
Okay.
another one that sort of they probably don't want to hear that they were kind of a gateway to much louder music in terms of say hard rock or metal, but
Mm.
also towards punk rock and
Mm.
sort of some indie kind of punk stuff as well. So it kind of
Yeah.
creates this weird sort of hybrid. I grew up in a small town, so it wasn't like we were really hung up on this crowd listens to this, and there's the
No,
goth kids with the
no.
Cure and all that. And it was just sort of like music. And if it was cool, we liked it. And if, or if it didn't grab you, you just kind of like didn't pay attention to it. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. And I'm kind of grateful that it was like that, because no one really sort of judged. Well, it wasn't until I later on got into, when I moved to bigger, or I got to know people from bigger centers, where it was kind of like, oh, well, people are very segregated in their tastes, like metal, punk. It was very
Yeah.
pop, and it'd be very sort of like, oh, okay. But I'm happy I had those early days of just a big melting pot of
Mm,
Cheap Trick and the MC5 and
perfect.
cheap and New York Dolls and all the things that kind
Mm,
of grabbed me, that sort of stemmed from finding Kiss into and it just gets all mixed together in there. You know what I mean? It's kind of a beautiful thing.
yeah. I had John Allen of Stone Horses on the podcast a while back, and he mentioned Kiss as well. And it kind of makes me think, because you guys have both said similar things, or it's like they're not Marvel superheroes, but they are. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
is kind of like there was that, not only the big production, but the face paint and the getup and the presentation. It might as well have been a cartoon or a comic book of sorts that kind of came to life. It was one of those.
100%.
Yeah.
I think that's why those guys are really hard to call what I would say influences. We were obsessed with them, but it was really hard to look at Elvis, who seemed like, I don't know, like omnipresent. He seemed these didn't seem like career options. You know what I mean? It was like the Beatles seemed like they came from the great beyond, and then Kiss was
Yeah.
literally superheroes. And so it's kind of like, so you literally kind of like, until I found a band like the Who, where I said, here's a tall, gangly guy with a big nose who's writing songs and smashing guitars. And I thought,
Yeah.
and it really kind of somehow was this realization that, like, oh, I think I could do that.
Mm,
I mean, the Lennon and McCartney thing is a very big sort of like, oh man, I don't know if I can, even entertain the idea of writing songs. And
right.
Elvis was, like I say, he was just this pillar of, like, he again felt like a superhero in his own way. And a lot of
Yeah.
this is just being children, you know what I mean? And until, stumbling upon a guitar, things like Kiss just seem like, I can't breathe fire and fly or whatever the hell else you felt like they could do.
Yeah, I love it though. It's like
Yeah.
it's somewhere between. I don't know if Cirque du Soleil was a thing back then, but it's like it's circus meets rock and roll and kind of all encompassing. It wasn't just a show; it was an event. You
Well,
know.
considering 1977, with Star Wars, and
Mm,
Kiss and all these things that we as children, Evil Knievel was a thing, it's
yeah,
like all these things were sort of like, it was a very big moment, I think for all involved.
yeah. Now, more on the bands there too. Now, you said you're from Canada, yes? Okay, originally.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Are there bands that you find that are like Canada's hidden treasures, like where you look at bands and you're like, God, they need more exposure, or at least
Well,
people
we
need to
put
know what this is, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like when I would first come to the States, it was always like Rush
Hmm.
or Triumph. Certain
Yep.
groups had it would be really strange how like Skinny Puppy or Voivod, some groups would really
Yeah.
translate depending on the metal, certain metal
Mm.
crowds or industrial music and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, I mean my band, I have a band called Toque with our
Mm.
drummer from Slash's band, Brent
Yep.
Fitz, and we
Hmm.
play, all this music that we felt like, there's obviously going to be things like Loverboy that translated, and
Hmm.
Rush, and
Hmm.
April Wine had some songs that translated, but then there's a lot of things that we felt, um I think, like any country though, like whether it's Japan or
Hmm.
Australia or Finland or wherever, they have groups that are popular there or artists that are popular there that we don't know about. That's sort of the
Yeah.
nature of. So Canada has a lot of that too. Like even to this
Yeah.
day, it's like now that I live abroad, it's sort of interesting when people say, "Hey, we went and saw this last night," and I'll be like, "What the hell is that?" And I'm like, "Oh, they're big up here," and I go, "Okay, I'll take your word for it because I'm so out of the loop."
Right.
And it's kind of the interesting thing about being able to have a career within your country.
Mm.
that doesn't necessarily translate beyond. There's bands like Sloan from Canada that are like basically a Canadian, they're Canadian staple. You know what I mean? The
Mhm.
Tragically Hip was like that too.
Yeah,
And the Tragically Hip were the Rolling Stones in Canada. Like they would fill hockey arenas and
that's
and
crazy.
stadiums, and then as soon as they crossed the border, it was like they were very specifically a Canadian
Yeah.
thing. And I think that's it's true of almost anywhere. It's the same as being, say, from like your area, Boston. There's
Mhm.
groups around there that have. It's weird how sometimes you'll find a group that was popular in that area but didn't
Mhm.
translate to the rest of the country, or especially back in the day when radio was so specific and DJs had the power to make or break a career. You could have things like
Wow.
a band being played in Buffalo and Philadelphia and
Mhm.
Detroit, and then like it wouldn't cross over or whatever. But
Yeah.
um, it's a fascinating thing. But like I say, there are definitely specifically Canadian
Yeah.
groups and artists for sure. Yeah.
There's my you know, I wrote this out, not thinking of this, but off the top of my head now. My vocal coach, her brother, is the singer in a band called Mariana's Trench.
Of
Uh,
course. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another example, like I've seen them a handful of times at like House of Blues, which will be about 800 to 1,000, 1,200, whatever. You could go as just Montreal or whatever. Can They're doing 20,000 or whatever else, and I'm like, this is like 2 hours south. How does this?
Well,
What?
it's a fascinating thing because I
Yeah.
mean that band is very, very talented bunch of guys
Hmm.
from Vancouver, and
Hmm.
deserve all the love they get.
Hmm.
They're great. But it is a weird thing. I think a lot of it has to do with um I mean, we saw it back in the day in the 70s. We had a lot of bands you would never have heard of, like Trooper or
Hmm.
Streetheart or Harlequin, or these groups from Canada that would be playing hockey arenas in Canada.
Hmm.
But and I think what ends up happening, and this happens to almost a lot of bands, this happens to the equivalent is being big in the States but never really going to Japan or never really going to Europe. So sometimes you can have a band that is, or the opposite can happen. But a lot of times a band can be like big in America, but they didn't put the time in as far as. So sometimes you can get kind of spoiled by being locally huge, and then it's kind of like, okay, guys, we've been traveling in tour buses. Now let's get in the van and
Hmm.
drive across America, playing to small clubs or opening for
Yeah.
people that they don't know who you are, and it's all hard work. It's all rolling your sleeves up, and sometimes things just don't work out that way. This is an industry built on, if anybody had figured it out, we'd all be gazillionaires a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the fact is it's such a wild card kind of
Yeah.
game. You never know how it's going to go.
Yeah. No one's written the book.
No, and no one has a crystal ball either. No one knows how this
No,
is all going to play
no,
out. Yeah.
no, I hear you. Um, but as regards, like you think of songwriting, and sometimes you just hit the nail on the head, and it only takes one time. You know, um,
It does. Yeah.
Going back in your catalog, I've realized there's only one song you can sing when you lose your remote control. I was doing it today, and I'm going, oh,
Yeah,
I know
yeah, yeah.
who to thank for that.
Dude, the funniest thing was back in the day, we used to be at, like, we'd go in for signing things or meet and greet type things, and people would always bring us a remote control. They always be like, ha, and
Have him sign it or something, or
I'd be thinking to myself, do your parents know you just they're probably looking for it. What
oh
the
my
hell?
God.
And I'm like, that is so funny.
Oh
There was just like
man.
tons of these remote controls rolling around that people brought over
Perfect.
as kind of a
Perfect.
joke. Yeah, yeah, it was.
Perfect. My question about that, I guess, is like, was that song different writing wise? Like, did you know what you were had there? Or was it just another one you were writing? You know,
Well, the guitar player brought that to the table.
I see.
He
Okay.
and he was I mean, it's one of those things though, when you're doing it. I mean, that's the weirdest thing about music in general, is often you'll have like one song that everybody's killing themselves over, spending a whole. I remember watching this thing where they had talked about the band Survivor had been asked to write a couple of songs for the Rocky 3, I think it was,
I think so,
and they
yeah.
and they really killed themselves on this one song, and then they just kind of threw out Eye of the Tiger, like it was kind of, and then there's this other one, and they were kind of like really, really putting their attention on this one thing,
Mm,
and Sylvester Stallone was like, "That's the song," and they're like,
yeah.
but," and that's generally seems to be true of 9 times out of 10. I hear stories about like how much effort was put into A, B, or C, and then the one
Mm,
that just kind of fell out of the sky suddenly is the one that everybody loves. But I think it's one of those things where I think we felt like we knew we had something pretty special. It's such a fascinating thing talking about that band because it's a really weird dynamic in that band because it was me and my brother and then two other brothers,
mm,
and we all were family. And then as we got more and more successful, we started to kind of fall apart. So even the making of that final record is this weird kind of like dynamic of us, kind of in you know it was kind of like a separation, a relationship that's taking another shot at it, and we just happened to stumble onto the biggest success we ever had, but not enough to make us go, you know what? I think things are working out. Let's raise some children together. It
right.
was like,
No.
it was like,
Yeah.
no, we're going to go our separate ways. But
Right.
that kind of song feels like it felt pretty special, and the fact that it connected. We were one of those groups though, because we were one of those bands that really started very grassroots. We were selling cassette tapes out of the back of the van. We were like that kind of band going from town to town, and we had built up this sort of like audience by one pair of ears at a time, so
Mm,
that by the time the record kind of by the time that record dropped, it was sort of
mm,
like it sort of went to another level in a way. So it
right.
felt like an extreme amount of hard work, sort of paying off in a way. And that's the way these things go.
They do.
Hopefully, if they go well, they
Right.
go like
Right.
that. Otherwise,
Um,
you're there's a great Kiss line. Well, technically, it's an Argent line, but the line that says, "It's never too late to work 9 to 5." I hold on very dearly to that one. You always have to be aware of the fact that it's never too late.
Oh man. Um, when was the first time you made a connection with Slash? When was that period of time there?
The funniest thing is he doesn't even remember it, but I've told this story even to him a few times. But in '91, my band, the band Age of Electric that did Remote Control, in '91 we were pretty brand new,
Hmm.
so we thought let's go to Los Angeles and do the thing and try and get signed. In the '80s, they had a whole scene in place where you hand out flyers, people come to your show, and all that kind of
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
So we had made some friends on the scene, and we were going to open for the Zeros at the Whiskey A Go Go, and another band that were actually initially Canadian, originally Canadian. Well, I guess they're still Canadian, but
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
yeah. But they were living in Los Angeles, called Anna Black, and they were
Mhm.
very of the time,
Mhm.
80s kind of hair metal, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm.
No shame in saying that.
No,
Um,
no.
and we went down there and we did the thing, and uh, we didn't get signed or anything, so it was kind of like one of those things. But it was a weird time because to us, like when people talk about it now, they go, "Oh, it was over by 88, 89 or whatever," and I go, "But it sure didn't feel like it was over because we went down there." And it was like the Sunset Strip was rocking, people everywhere, every single night. And then we went to uh, the Rainbow. We would go to the
Mhm.
Rainbow every night
Nice, nice.
after and do and to hang out. And it was like
Sure.
a parade of
I bet.
metal magazine. Lemmy's here.
Nice.
And it would just be like and we're sitting in the back booth, which I now since call the November Rain booth because it's in the back.
Just
And if
watched
you
that
watch
video yesterday. Yeah.
if you watch the video, they're all sitting in that back booth with their
Hmm.
chicks at the time. And anyway, we found ourselves back there, and in the corner booth, I didn't know at the time, but and apparently it had always been Slash's sort of his hang. And there's a picture of him in there now.
Hmm.
Um, so we're just sitting there because that's just where we would end up at the end of the night.
Sure.
And I think we noticed him, but it was like it was such an you were kind of like seeing people all the time. You were kind of like whatever, not whatever, but kind of like it wasn't surprising to
Yeah,
see,
accustomed to. Yeah.
yeah, almost anybody. They
Hmm.
had whatchamacallit, Use Your Illusion albums hadn't dropped yet. They were
Okay.
still kind of dealing with that. So he sat down he just got up and came over to our table and goes like, "Hey, who are you guys?" And we're kind of like, you know, we're like, "What?" And he sat at our table, a couple girls, just kind of like, "Hey," and I was like, the strangest thing to us, because we were literally some kids from Saskatchewan, Canada, may as well be like, Fargo or something, and we were just kind of like, we're from Canada. I go, no way, and it was this, because I've told him this story before, and he goes, "Well, was I nice?" I go, "You're actually awesome." I was like,
Good.
it could have gone in any number of ways when you're just a bunch of jackasses from nowhere. Um, on that same trip, we saw them film there's a clip, the video at the end of "You Could Be Mine" with Arnold
Mm.
Schwarzenegger. We
Uh-huh.
saw them film that outside between the Rainbow and the Roxy.
Oh,
And
cool.
it just by chance happened to be there that night. It was like, what's going on here? Because you walk out and it's like Arnold Schwarzenegger is Terminator 2 wasn't even out yet. So you just came out of this rainbow and you
Just
just saw
yeah.
he's just standing there in the Terminator gear, because everybody had seen the first Terminator, but I was like, what the going on? Because no one had, they didn't have the internet back then. I didn't know that there was going to be a new Terminator, or there was going to be a Guns N' Roses song involved. Anyway,
Hey,
so
yeah.
fast forward several months, we kind of go, we were there. We watched them do this.
Yeah.
So, but he has no recollection of meeting us because we were just a bunch of kids. So it wasn't until 2010 when I had initially moved down to Vegas, because I hadn't even really moved. It was like the scene in Canada was drying up, and was like anything else, downloading and everything else had made it really a brief period there where it was really kind of stagnant. And I just thought, and just by chance, a friend of mine was like, "Come down to Vegas. We got this going on, that going on." His band was recording, and I was going to help them and play guitar on stuff. And anyway, long story short, I went down, and that turned into another thing and another thing and another thing. And the next thing I knew, I just kind of thought, I'll just stay here till the money runs out, and it never really ran out. So I just kind of stayed. And then, that was 2006. And then, I put together a band down there with Brent Muscat from Faster Pussycat, and it got really popular. And then I got the call to come down and jam with the guys in LA. Brent Fitz was an old friend of mine from Canada, the drummer.
Sure.
And he goes like, "Hey, come down and jam." And it was very sort of like, it wasn't like come down and try out. It was like, come down and jam. And I went down, and that was sort of that. It's sort of like they didn't really want to let me go. I was like, "I got gigs this weekend. I got to get out of here." Yeah. But it was that was 2010. So it'll be 15 years in March, basically. Yeah. So
Fantastic. So I guess maybe I read something wrong, or somebody, everything on the internet is true, right? Okay. Because I had
yeah,
heard
yeah,
that,
exactly.
because I had heard that or read that you had auditioned to front Velvet Revolver. Maybe that's incorrect.
Well, that's an interesting story too, because like once in a while I hear somebody say, "Oh, so and so tried out for Velvet Revolver," and I go, "Well, I'm sure that's true, but there was a period there like before Scott got involved.
Hmm.
There was a period that anybody who had ever sung a song in their life was suddenly being handed like a cassette tape or a CD, probably, of like,
I think I saw a thing like
here's
that. Yeah. Like they filmed it or
here's
something. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They did a full documentary
Yeah.
on VH1. And of course,
Okay.
by the time I got it, Scott was already kind of happening, but I wasn't aware of that. And it was like one of those things that anybody who had ever sung in a band or whatever was handed a thing and said, "Can you make something of these two or three songs?" I don't remember what it was now.
Wow.
So I did, but I again, like I said, like within seconds, it was announced that Scott was the singer, and I was kind of like, "Oh,
Gotcha.
okay." Yeah.
All
So
right.
it was a weird thing that, like, I had no contact with anybody. I think that some friend of mine through management or through label, that kind of thing, and it just goes off into the ether, and then you never hear anything. And then Miles as well. Miles was
Yeah,
approached.
I heard he did too. Yeah.
Miles was approached, but I don't think he really bit the bullet on that. I think he was kind of like, he said he was kind of like, he was not in the mindset. He was just kind of like, "Ah, I'm
Uh,
okay."
I thought he
Yeah.
was doing Alter Bridge at that point, or no?
That's a good question. I'm not quite sure how that all went down,
Okay,
but yeah,
because
you're probably right, but that's probably what was
yeah,
going
I
on.
don't know. Big into Alter Bridge myself too. What a group!
Great band.
My
Great
goodness,
band. Yeah.
Miles. I would love to have any of those guys on. I mean, Miles in an interview I listened to spoke very highly of your singing, where he said
Ah,
something of the sort of I'm paraphrasing, but he said you're one of the few people who can harmonize above him. because of the he says I get to certain places where like with Mark Tremonti is kind of more of a baritone, he'll harmonize below, but he's I guess my question is Miles is an absolute powerhouse and we all know
He
this.
really is. Yeah, yeah.
So how do you keep yourself vocally in shape to do what you got to do with Miles and them?
It's funny because within that context, as far as playing with someone like Miles, as a vocalist, I'm not really, having to sing 90 minutes straight of or 2 hours or whatever the hell it is of a full show. So it's really, kind of like, like Brent Fitz likes to go, and then Todd just kind of walks on stage and sings like that. It's kind of like, well, it's sort of like I'm singing harmonies from the beginning, so it's like the show itself is kind of a warm up to by the time I have to sing anything sort of. Well, I mean, I guess it's all pretty challenging. Like um the records we make with Elvis, Michael
Hmm.
Basquiat,
Hmm.
um he's not afraid to get really creative with harmonies and stuff like that. And I think if you don't have that person that can sing those harmonies, then they're just kind of more like a studio um, you know,
Hmm.
spice that may not be
Yeah.
there live, or maybe it's on tape. I don't know how kids are doing it these days. But for me, it was just kind of like, we started with Eric Valentine back in 2012 or 2011, I guess we are making that record,
Hmm.
Apocalyptic Love. And that was sort of the first experiments of like, well, what about this and sing that? And what about that? And what about this? And the next thing you know,
Hmm.
it's kind of like, I'm sort of strapped to the microphone for a good chunk of the show. Um, but like, yeah, it's like, getting to sing with someone like that it keeps you on your toes, because I wasn't really into using in-ear monitors at the time, but because I was singing with Miles, who was, he's very serious about his voice and he
Yeah.
sort of got in-ear monitors. And I thought, well, you know what? If I'm going to be like singing with him this closely, I'm going to try and get like, you know,
Yeah.
try and be as precise as possible. I'm still very
Yeah.
punk rock in my approach in almost every possible way. I'm not trained really at anything that I do. I call it street fighting. Like it's kind of like rather than being at the dojo
Perfect.
learning all this stuff,
Yeah.
I just learned it all
Right.
brawling in bars, and
Hey.
instead of brawling, I was, playing loud rock shows. And so
Yeah.
there's times where people are like, I can't hear myself. And I go like, I, I spent like 20 years not be able to hear myself, it's kind of the way it goes.
Yeah.
So I don't, all that kind of stuff is, there's Miles shows up with the skill and the training, and I'm there kind of like as this
Yeah.
sort of, street fighter really is what it feels like. Yeah.
I have seen the Conspirators twice. Once on the
Mm.
Apocalyptic Love tour. Actually, Lemmy came
Mm.
out
Yeah.
a
In
few.
Boston. Yeah. I know
Yep,
that. A House of Blues. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was there. I was there for that
Oh,
one,
cool. Yeah.
and that was the only one time
That's like,
2012.
oh,
I
wow. Is it
believe.
that long? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember
Wow. Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, I had just like a month prior had my first professional gig myself, so like
Cool.
it was one of those things, and just kind of
Yeah.
like, well, I think some of the funds that we earned got us that ticket.
Ah,
Round
nice.
round and
Nice.
round.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember the Lemmy had come out, and I remember that was the one time I never saw Motorhead, but like that was just such a treat because none of us expected that. That was just kind
No,
of
I know.
yeah. I think he just was. They were going to play the next day or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. They
So
were in town for something. I can't remember what it was, but yeah,
no,
no, Lemmy
right? Yeah.
was like, I was lucky enough to have played with Lemmy even before that, actually, like before I was ever playing with Slash. But
Hmm.
he was like, he was legit, man. Like he was the real deal. And every
Right.
time I'd see him on or like, if I'd see him out of context, you know what I mean? Like when I wasn't with the guys or whatever, if I just ran into him in a bar or whatever, I'd be like, hey, Lenny, it's Todd. I play with Slash. And he would always be like, yeah, I know. He's like, he
It's
was
just
incredibly, he was incredibly sharp that way. Like he was not
mm,
like he wasn't one of those people that needed to be handheld through anything. He was always like, yeah,
reminded or
I know.
whatever. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know.
But one of the greatest, it's just an icon, really. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. He
they
really.
only made one, really. They only made one.
Only
Yeah.
did one. That documentary of that those guys did about him was
It was
absolutely
incredible. Yeah.
phenomenal. Yeah.
The best. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. What is your personal uh, favorite part of working with Slash? What is the for you personally?
Well, it's funny because like as the years go by, it's like, people are like, we're friends. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, I don't mean to be too presumptuous, but I really honestly, like, there's giant periods where like he's doing a Guns tour or whatever, and we haven't seen each other in quite a while, but we go back and forth about like, I actually anything but music. It's usually like, have you seen this movie, or are you watching
Right.
this series, or
Yeah.
it's kind of like he's a horror movie nerd, and
Hmm.
I am a horror movie nerd, but he is super invested. Like, he'll
Sure.
watch anything, slasher related or whatever. Slasher related. See, pun intended.
Well
Um,
done. I was just gonna say.
yeah. And
Well
then
done.
I'm more like, sci-fi and comic
Mm,
books, and
yeah.
I like a good drama. I like a good comedy. It's like, but we do share a lot of, like, when there's a new whatever it is, King Kong or Godzilla. It's like, oh
Sure.
wow,
Perfect.
and it's just all this sort of Arrested Development trapped in our youth, talking about, like, that we grew up on. But working together, it's sort of I was saying this the other day, how he's never told us what to wear. He's never once said, like, you have to wear black, or you have to wear. He's never told us what kind of guitars to play. He's never told us what
Mm.
or not told us, but he's always been like, bring what you bring to the party, and when it comes to making music together, he's very open and giving um to you doing what you do. Certainly there's going to be things of like, well, it's can you play more like this riff, look more closely related with what I'm playing, as opposed to, because sometimes those things can get kind of like they rub, or they don't, they're not right. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But then beyond that, it's more like, feel and what you bring to the potluck that is music. So in general, it's always a pleasure, really. I mean, and he's quite an inspiration as far as his his constitution, his tenacity, his ambition. I mean, he's one of those guys that plays better today than he did 10 years ago and 10 years before that.
Wow.
It's just the nature. He's constantly growing, he's constantly working, and
Yeah.
he really has no reason to be as busy as he is. Making a blues record last year or whatever. It's kind of like he does it because why shouldn't he do it? I mean,
Yeah.
and he has the freedom to do so. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, um,
Man.
I think it's inspiring. It makes guys like me go, yeah, I got to get off my ass. It's like,
Totally, totally. When I know this was we kind of put this together a little quickly when we were going to do this, but I put it up on my page that I was going to have you on, and we have sometimes questions from our viewers, and
oh,
we
cool.
we got a few. My goodness.
Oh, cool. I'm
Okay.
glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Who are you, and why are you talking to Andrew?
Perfect. Who is this man? These are good ones though. Just a couple of them here. Arthur, he wanted to ask, do you have much creative freedom playing with Slash, or is he mostly ask you to stick to the established parts? And I guess the second part of it is like, does he himself kind of mix it up?
Well, that's actually what we were just talking about a little
Yeah,
bit.
kind of.
Was
I was
kind of
gonna
like,
say.
obviously, I mean, the riffs come from him, and the
Hmm.
words come from Miles. So,
Right.
as a guy who writes songs as well, like myself, it's sort of like you kind of know what you're getting into when you start working with people like this, because it's sort of it's kind of like you just pick your lane. And like I said, there's a great deal of freedom, and he's one of the things I appreciate about him is he's not precious about, like, an arrangement can be like, is very malleable until it's actually committed to tape. You know what I mean? And it's sort
Mm.
of, um, so sometimes, he's never ever, like I said, he's never ever said to me, you know, you must play this. There are times where we try to fly in tandem, I call it, where we're playing the same part together, kind of thing. So
Right.
that has to be locked in. But beyond that, it's sort of like just do what you do, and
Right.
bring your own sort of sauce to the recipe. And I think that
Love it.
we're all very lucky that way.
Love it. Uh, Next one, Paul had this is kind of interesting. Had asked specifically about your thoughts and opinions of Tom Hamilton from Aerosmith. Um,
Oh, yeah. Tom is one of my all-time heroes, actually. I think it's hard to call him underrated because I think everybody just kind of goes, oh, yeah, Tom Hamilton, he's great. But I think in reality, he's one of those guys that taught me a lot about um, what he's doing isn't necessarily what those guys are doing, or at least not exactly. Like he's kind of got his own thing going on. And he's a perfect example of what I always say about playing bass, which is he's playing with the drums, the groove or whatever, but he also has to play with the guitars within the realm of
yeah,
notes and the chords that are being played. But he's one of those guys that finds a way to kind of do what he's doing. It kind of moves the whole thing along without it being like doing exactly the same thing as the guitars. So quite a few of those songs, like Sweet Emotion and things like that, what he's doing underneath the verse part is
yeah.
quite different than what people think he's doing. And I think that's true of most of the parts he plays. He's also like, when I was a kid, I remember seeing him with a Gibson Thunderbird bass, and that's what I play predominantly. And that and my signature bass that I have is sort of Thunderbird ish. So
Yeah.
when I think about that, when I think about the Thunderbird, I think about Tom. Although he played a lot of different basses, even like things like Stingrays or like Music Man basses, I first saw on Tom. He's always very um, like anybody tone seeking. I can tell he's
Yeah.
sort of like he's playing these now. And I think, oh, okay, cool, yeah.
He's after
I, I
something.
he's a legend. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody ever really stops seeking. Frankly, I think we're always kind of like, what
Yeah.
about this? What about that? Yeah.
Yeah. This one's a funny one. This actually kind of came from a friend of mine. My friend Tara wanted to don't mind me. She goes, "What is your hair care routine? I am more than a little bit jealous."
It's so funny that you say that because as I was getting ready for this, I was like, "Oh my god, my hair's a nightmare." Because I was just in Vancouver, Canada this weekend
Mm.
doing a couple of shows. Flew in, hair's all in a ponytail and upside down for a couple of days, and I'm like, okay, all right, I got to talk to Andrew. Pull it out and shake it around. Honestly, I wish my wife always makes fun of me because she spends so much time in her hair, and all you do is pull it down out of a ponytail, and it looks, and I go, the reality is I don't do much. It's like
I didn't think so.
it's not naturally this black, but we've been doing this for 20, 30 years now of just kind of like being rock and roll guys who dye their hair. But largely it's pretty much the same. It's like I wash it when I begrudgingly have to wash it.
Hey, maybe it's the
Yeah,
natural oils or whatever the heck,
maybe. Yeah, you know how it is.
know.
It's like when I say that, I wash it pretty regularly, but it's
No,
like
I
like
know.
like anybody, it's like it's too much hair. And frankly, the longer it is, the less you have to think about it. It's kind of this is what it is. I can't really do much else with it other than it's up or it's
No,
down. But when it's
right.
like anytime it was sort of like any shorter, like mid length or shorter, it was like I was like, now I feel like whenever they say he's got long hair like a girl, I'd always go, actually, quite the opposite. It was like when it was this or that, it was sort of like that's when I felt the most like products and having to do my hair before I went anywhere, all that kind of stuff felt like, oh God, enough already. I totally understand guys who are just like zzz, baseball
Yeah.
cap gone.
No,
Yeah.
I like to feel my neck. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Um, Scotty had asked, how long did it take for you to feel comfortable playing your instrument? I guess he was talking about like the learning curve, I suppose.
Oh, well, the funniest thing about that is like I was one of those guys that I had barely learned much. My dad at the time had this weird, he sort of like went like, well, you got a guitar. Before I had an acoustic guitar, an Epiphone acoustic guitar as a kid.
Mhm.
And he goes, well, you got a guitar. We should probably get you a bass. Like, he didn't even think like we should get you an electric guitar. I was just kind of like, we should get you a bass. Like, I don't think he was really all that informed on anything. I think he was just
Gotcha.
kind of like, well, bro, let's get a bass. And I remember we
All right.
went down to the store and there was a Gibson EB3, which is the SG style bass on the
Yeah.
wall. And he goes, what about that? And I have it to this day.
Oh,
And then, I go home I'm assuming it wasn't very expensive because there's no way, knowing my father, there was no way he was willing to just throw down on an expensive instrument. But suddenly, like I was like, I probably 14, 13. I can't remember how young I was, but I was like a kid. And then when it became like, hey, this guy's got a Gibson, which, was like, you may as well say I have Excalibur or something.
Right. Yeah.
It just seemed like, and the next thing I knew, these older kids, um, they were all out of high school except the drummer was in the 12th grade.
Mhm.
Was like, I was suddenly playing with those guys, and I was a kid, like I was a child, pretty much. They couldn't play bar, or they could play bars, and I would be sitting in the kitchen because I wasn't allowed to
Right.
actually be in. I'd go play on the
Oh
stage, and I have to
yeah.
go wait. Yeah, that
Oh
kind of
yeah.
thing. So I did that for years,
Hmm.
and then, yeah, that was sort of the comfort of it all. I think there was something about like the fact that because I never was a natural. I played hockey because I was the law in Canada as a child, and I really loved it, but I didn't have that sort of my father called it killer instinct, which I actually personally think is a good thing. Maybe not a sociopath or whatever. So I picked up a guitar and
Yeah.
and I just sort of like I loved it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed playing with my friends. We played at high school dances back then, and then
Right.
so being comfortable with it. I think I'm still uncomfortable in some ways when it comes to like I was saying to somebody the other day. I am a very specific kind of player. If you're looking for a guy who has the bass hung low, plays with a pick, and is 9 feet tall, then I'm your guy. But you know, not everybody wants to hire that guy. Like
It's funny because my bass player from my old band is exactly that guy.
exactly, yeah. We sound like we're from the same school. It's like then
Mm,
then I would see guys, and I'm not saying the same as anybody else. I'm blown away by a guy who can do even as a guitar player. When I started out, I loved watching Eddie Van Halen or Randy Rhoads, but I never had any interest in. It didn't really make me think like I'm going to play like that. Like it didn't.
oh
It
yeah.
just didn't occur to me. Like I just liked playing. Just playing. I didn't really feel like you know that was for me. It was kind of like it was like being impressed with watching somebody juggle chainsaws. It was kind of, to me it was
Yeah.
like wow, look at that. I'm not going to try that. That seems nuts.
Right. Seems a little
But
lethal there.
yeah, exactly. But that said, I think I was always comfortable with um I think to this day, like even now, I just survived a weekend of like flying up to Vancouver, playing a couple shows, coming back to Florida to finish up our Slash record. Then I'm going to go into a charity show where I'm playing something like 30, 40 songs of Kiss material that we're raising money for fighting cancer. And a lot of it is kind of like, even then, I'm like, good Lord, what did I agree to? I have to learn all these songs, learn
Yeah.
words, and you're kind of like, you're always kind of, um, like you've climbed a mountain and then you just get to the summit of that mountain and realize, oh, this isn't the top of the mountain. This is just like a base camp. And now we got to go to the next, it's like you're constantly climbing, constantly working. And that's not a bad thing. I'm happy to do it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
But keep playing. You get more and more comfortable. That's basically at the end of the day. I think it's just keep going.
Yeah. Keep moving one foot in front of the other.
Exactly. Yeah.
What is 20 you're finishing up the Slash record as you said. What is 2025 looking for you guys? Well, for you anyhow.
Yeah. Well, Toque's got a big focus this year to try and kind of do as much as we can. Only because Toque, this Canadian thing that we started off as a fun band playing Canadian charity stuff and learning a bunch of Canadian cover songs. Because we just are Canadian guys who live in the U.S. but grew up on all that music we talked about earlier
Sure, sure.
that a lot of people aren't familiar with. But in Canada, it's successful and popular. So we focused on that, and then we slowly kind of amalgamating into becoming a real band that writes music and releases music. So a big part of the focus is trying to go into doing a little bit more with that before the Slash record comes out. Maybe late 25. I don't even know. There really hasn't been a plan per se. So,
Right.
I got a few other things on the go that'll keep me busy. I know my calendar's pretty full till about September. So it's kind of like one of those things where you just can't help but be like, like I said, we're just perpetually climbing. There's always another mountain to climb. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Well, when the new Slash record comes out, I don't know how we may make that happen, but I'd love to have you or your boss or anyone else come on the show if ever that could be a thing.
Sure. I'll try and convince some of these characters to come hang out. That'd be fun. Yeah.
would love to. But in any event, it's
I love it.
cannot thank you enough. This has been
Thank
super
you.
fun. Gonna
Absolutely.
and we'll stop our tape recording or tape. Whoa, woo, tape.
I always say the same thing. Are you gonna?
For more of my original content, visit my website, www.andyconley.com.